Good morning. It's altogether possible that I might say something that you would not agree with. It's highly unlikely, but we're going to allow some time at the end of this presentation for some Q&A, some interaction. So it'll be an opportunity for you to come back at me if there's something that you disagree with. You can have some time to explain that, and then, of course, I can explain how you're wrong, so we'll have some good discussion together. It's an honor to be with you, and it's a joy to serve with an organization that's on the cutting edge. 44 years ago, I was in Vietnam, which I thought would be clearly the most wasted year of my life. God had other plans, however, and I came home from that experience with a sense of calling to work with troubled young men. I saw a lot of troubled young men in Vietnam, and so I set up a program with the juvenile court in Atlanta, started working with kids on probation, and it didn't take very long to figure out that you can't work very effectively with troubled kids apart from their home situations, the family. And so I went back to school to learn how to work with families and expanded our program to include the families of probationers, only to realize that you can't work very effectively with struggling families apart from the environment that impacts on them every time they step out of the door, which pushed me to get more involved with what was happening on the street, with the police, in the schools, only to conclude that the most effective way to change an environment is to work from within, to become a part of that environment and work from the inside for change. Now that's not an insight that one shares quickly with one's spouse. Matter of fact, we were just in the process of building Peggy's new dream home, a little farther out of the city, and I waited way too long to share this insight. We were about 5 weeks away from moving into our new home, and I remember the night that it happened. We'd gone to bed early, and Peggy just wanted to talk. This is the time when you're making decisions about the carpet and the light fixtures and the cabinetry, high-energy stuff. And I said, I don't think you want to talk with me tonight. And she said, oh no, what's wrong? And I said, I don't think God wants us moving farther out of the city. I think he wants us moving into the city. That was a bad night. In the morning, Peggy says, is this your idea or God's idea? Because if it's your idea, I'm not interested at all. She concluded, after reading a 7-page letter that I tried to explain what I felt was a calling, she concluded that at least I believed that this was a calling of God. And if it is, what choice do you really have? So as a tribute to Peggy's spiritual depth, that she let go of her dream to have a new home in a safe area to raise our 2 boys in good schools with good friends, and let go of that, the kind of environment that she had grown up in, and move into what seemed like a very dangerous and foreign place to raise a family. Well, that was about a 10-year learning curve for me. During that 10 years, I'd been commuting into the city and gotten use of an old Presbyterian church there, and we set up offices there and I felt some very good programs, got very active. The clothes closet, the food pantry, those kind of things. Even did some mission trips. But the first week we were there in the city, I saw something that, or the first year that we were there in the city, I started seeing things that I hadn't noticed before. One of the most exciting programs we did was what we called our Adopt a Family program at Christmas time. That's when you give the names of kids that aren't going to get anything for Christmas, and caring people from around the city go shopping, and then on Christmas Eve they bring those toys to the homes of these children, and it created a lot of excitement. I spent a lot of time coordinating that. But the first Christmas that we were living in the community, that was really the first time I had the opportunity to be in the homes of some of the recipient families when the gift-bearing families arrived. And I saw something that I just had not seen before. The kids, of course, were excited, and the moms were gracious, maybe a little embarrassed. But if there was a dad in the household, he just disappeared. He was gone out the back door. And it dawned on me what was happening was that these parents in front of their own children were being exposed for their inability to provide. And the moms would endure that indignity for the sake of the kids. But for fathers, it was just more than they could handle. It was as though their impotence was being exposed in front of their wives and kids in their own living rooms. It was killing them. I'd never seen that before. And I began to wonder, is this same kind of indignity happening in the other programs that we're doing? I was reading everything I could get my hands on in those days on poverty and urban issues. Wasn't a lot written, but I came across one author, a French philosopher, theologian by the name of Jacques Ellul. And this quote, if this works, help me here. There's the quote. Ellul said, almsgiving, that's the old word for charity, almsgiving is Mammon's perversion of giving. It affirms the superiority of the giver. It binds the recipient and demands gratitude. It humiliates him and leaves him at a lower state than he had before. Can you see why that hit me right in the gut? It wasn't why we were there to humiliate anybody. We were there to affirm, to build up, to encourage, not diminish people. And so I started looking at everything we were doing. The clothes closet, that was a pretty easy one to set up. We don't wear out our clothes in this culture, so it's easy to gather in clothes. We had plenty of space. And so I said to our neighbors, these are the free gifts of God's people. Help yourself. And it was a wonderful spirit until we actually opened the doors and folks came charging in and grabbing up as many armfuls of clothes as they could carry out. And I'd find those clothes scattered around the community, no place to try them on, and realize this isn't very good stewardship. And so we hastily drew up some rules, posted them. Limit the number of garments per visit, limit the number of visits per month. And that was like saying, let the games begin. Can we get some garments for our kids that are in school? Can we get some garments for my sick uncle who can't get in here today? You just know where that's going. In no time, we're behaving like temple police, guarding the resources against the very folks we were there to serve among. An adversarial relationship. It wasn't what we had in mind. We had in mind sharing our lives, sharing our resources, not being guards like temple police guarding against the very folks we were there to serve among. We tried our hand at mission trips. That was something that everybody was engaged in, and so we decided let's take a long-term commitment to a real community in need, and connected with a bishop in Honduras, and he connected us with a little Honduran remote village, and we went there for our first mission trip, and the first thing we saw was folks carrying water. They needed a well. It was obvious, and so we had the connections, we had resources, and we dug a well for them, and there was great celebration in the village. We made the long-term commitment. We came back the next year, and the women were still carrying water, and we said, what's wrong with that well? Well, it had broken down, and so we fixed it, and that same thing happened the following year, and the following year, and the following year. Folks just waited for us to come back to fix our well. Eventually, the bishop that had hooked us up with this village came quietly to our pastor and said, it might be better if you would serve someplace else. He said there's some unhealthy dependencies that are going on here. That's really bad when you get kicked out of Honduras, particularly when you're Presbyterian. I started looking at the way our one-way giving was playing out, and I noticed a pattern, a downward spiral that seemed to repeat itself over and over again. When you give somebody something once, it elicits appreciation. Oh, thank you very much. Surprise, delight. By the second time, it's created a little anticipation. Oh, I wonder if this is what he does. Maybe this is a program that he's going to initiate. By the third time, it becomes an expectation. I know that he does this. I need to get in line to position myself for the next gift that's coming my way. By the fourth time, it has become an entitlement. You owe me. I would rather have a ham this Thanksgiving than a turkey. Thank you. I have a right. And by the fifth time, it's just pure dependency. You can't stop now. We're counting on this. We're depending on this. I saw that happening, that same spiral, over and over again with the way we were doing our charity. And I said, we got to stop this. And so we said we are only going to be giving things in crisis emergency situations. Whereupon the incidence of crises skyrocketed. Everybody had a crisis. And I said, wait a second. There's a difference between a crisis and chronic need. In a crisis situation, that's when an earthquake hits Haiti. That's an emergency, and it demands an emergency response. That's the right response. But as soon as the immediate crisis has passed, now it's time to start helping folks rebuild their lives. It requires shifting to a development strategy. If you address a crisis need with a crisis intervention, lives are saved. It's the right response. On the other hand, if you address a chronic need with a crisis intervention, people are harmed. Remember Katrina 10 years ago? That was an emergency, and we responded as a nation with an outpouring of emergency help. It was in New Orleans this past fall. You know what I saw there? Convoys of caring people coming in from all over the country, loaded down with emergency supplies to minister to the victims of Katrina. You get that? Victims of Katrina? We've created a whole victim class of people who are dependent on the ongoing outpouring of emergency supplies for what has clearly become a chronic poverty situation. Address a chronic poverty situation with an emergency response, and people are harmed. What about hunger in our country? Well, hunger that's a chronic need. Starvation now, that's a crisis. But hunger in our country? I've been living, serving in inner city Atlanta for 40 years now, and I've never seen a starving person. I've seen folks miss meals. I've seen food insecurity. I've seen bad nutrition. I've seen homeless guys dumpster dive, but I haven't seen starvation. And yet when you think of the way we do food distribution in this country, those are emergency responses to what is clearly chronic poverty needs. Remember the old adage, feed a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach him to fish, he eats for a lifetime? We've set up fish feeding stations out of our churches and our nonprofits that should be fishing classes. There's a reason why the poor in our country remain poor. So we said we've got to stop. We've got to change our paradigm. First of all, we've got to change our attitude about our neighbors. Instead of seeing them as people in need, as the poor, we've got to start seeing them as people with capacities, people with abilities, people with talents and resources that, given the opportunity, they will take more and more responsibility for their own lives and well-being. Self-sufficiency will grow when we recognize and help facilitate those talents and abilities. No one is so poor that they have nothing to contribute. Everybody has something to bring to the table. And so we said it becomes a responsibility of those of us who are stewards of resources to set up those systems of reciprocity where everybody can participate. And then I said we're going to adopt what we call a golden rule of effective service, and it's this: I'll never do for others what they have the capacity to do for themselves. When I do for others what they can do, I'm assuming responsibility for them that was never mine, never intended for me to carry. Never do for others what they have the capacity to do for themselves. And so we changed everything. The next Christmas, when folks started calling in for their adopted family, I said, would you give an extra gift this year? Would you give the gift of dignity to the dads? And here's how you do it. Go shopping, buy the toys, don't wrap them. Bring them in, we'll set up a little storefront, we'll call it the Old Toy Shop, and we'll put somewhere between a wholesale and a garage sale price on those toys. And we'll invite parents to come in and go shopping. And even if they don't have money, if they're unemployed, well, we're creating cash flow here. And so we can hire unemployed parents so that on Christmas morning, the parents in our community have the same joy as most of the parents have in our society of seeing their kids open the gifts that they have purchased through the efforts of their own hands. And there will be dignity in the process of exchange. Well, we found out a couple of very important things that first Christmas that we called that promotion, Pride for Parents. One thing we found out was that our neighbors would much rather work to earn, to purchase toys that they knew would delight their kids than they would stand in the free toy lines with their proof of poverty and accept gifts that others had selected for them. We learned that. We also learned a universal truth. Universal, that's for all people of all time. It's this: everyone loves to find a bargain. Universal. So Peggy's out shopping this past Christmas, and comes home after a grueling day of Christmas shopping and lugs her bags into the living room, spreads out her treasures around the living room for me to admire. And she said, "And you know what?" She said, "I saved more than I spent." I'm not an economist, but I do know this. She was excited about finding bargains. So why do we think it would be such a blessing to the poor to exclude them from the joy of finding and purchasing bargains? The clothes closet, well, that adversarial relationship was very difficult. And I was explaining to a group of Methodist men. Do we have any Methodists here today? Mostly Presbyterian, I guess. There's a couple. They're very smart people. As a matter of fact, some of them are so smart that they know the answers to things that and they've never even been there. And so I was sharing this problem, and they said, well, there's a simple answer to that. It's called the market. You put a fair rate of exchange on a desired commodity, it cuts all that out. I said, really? Oh, yeah. So he said, would you help us set that up? And they had a meeting and said, yeah, we'll take this on as our men's missions project this year. And those guys set about doing what they can't help doing in their sleep anyhow. Got to have a business plan, traffic flow patterns, real estate research, got to be on a bus line, shop the competition, bring it in right underneath Goodwill Industries thrift store. They said if we do it right, this thing will turn a profit. We'll be able to train folks in retail merchandising, move them out into the economic mainstream. It takes about 2 years, they said, for a business to break even. Well, they were pretty close. About 18 months later, that little clothes closet turned thrift store, moved into the black, and has been a bright spot in the community ever since. And they were absolutely right, changed the dynamic totally. The dynamic between giver and recipient, where the giver has to be careful that the recipient doesn't get too much, and the relationship between merchant and customer, where the merchant wants the customer to spend all that they can spend because he needs them. That's how he's paying the light bill. That's how he's meeting payroll. And the trainees, they picked that up pretty quick. Their salaries were riding on that. So the question is, how do we make people feel comfortable and want to come back here and feel welcomed? And so they said, well, at least we ought to get everybody's name down that comes in here, and if we can find out something about them. So when Miss Jones comes into the store, we can say, good morning, Miss Jones. How are you this morning? How's your mother doing? See, everybody wants to go where everybody knows their name. That's about making people feel valued, not guarding against them. Our mission trips, well, that first unsuccessful attempt, we got a second chance. We ran into a group called Opportunity International who are doing some really innovative things with microcredit. That's an exchange platform. And so we entered into a discussion together about what would it look like if you had that micro-lending platform and you superimposed upon it a community economic development platform. Would the two of those together produce even better fruit, better outcomes? That discussion ended up in a commitment to do a 5-year pilot study. Opportunity said, we'll pick the location. They picked Nicaragua, had a presence there. We said, we'll pick the community developer. We knew Geraldine Sheehan, world class. And Geraldine was ready for another challenge, and so she, with her teenage daughter, moved into Nicaragua, immersed themselves in the culture. One of the first things Geraldine noticed was that a lot of our neighbors, farmers, were growing a sweet potato kind of tuber they call yucca, is cassava. And that was a staple of their diet. And Geraldine noticed that there was a lot of land that was uncultivated, and so she asked them, why don't you grow more yucca? And they said, well, we can't eat more yucca. And she said, yeah, you could sell it though, right? And they explained to her, no, if you pull it out of the ground, it starts to wither up in 2 or 3 days, and you can't sell it. We don't have any way to get it to the market. Well, Geraldine had seen yucca in the supermarkets, even in the United States. And she said, that's not withered up. So she did some inquiring, found out that if you dip it in paraffin, it gives it a 2-month shelf life. And so she came back and told her farmers, that's how they're doing this. They're dipping it in paraffin. And so she said, you want to try to set something like this up? And so there were about a dozen farmers that said, yeah, we'd be interested in that. And they got a little propane tank and a little vat, bought some paraffin, and started dipping some of their yucca. Well, the money that they earned from that was significant. And the word got out, and now there were 40 farmers that want in on this. And so Geraldine continued to try to expand the operation. And finally, it got to a point where she said, we really need somebody with some business sense, somebody that knows how to actually bring this to scale. And so she put it online, and there's a young guy who is here this morning, who is making some really good money up in New York City, but feeling a call of God. DK came down and immediately sized up the situation and said, we've got to have some better equipment. We've got to, some of it we could design ourselves, other we would have to get from other places in the world. And so they increased the efficiencies of that little dipping process and now had a food processing plant that has grown over the years. And now, latest count is they're serving more than 1,000 farmers in the region with more than 60 employees. That is having a dramatic economic as well as spiritual, social impact on the entire region. And you see the changes. The changes are visible. Instead of plowing with oxen, now they've got a shared tractor. Instead of always going by horseback, now they've got some old pickups. Instead of thatch-roofed houses, now they've got tin roofs on the house. You see those changes that are happening in the culture. And DK is about ready to open a state-of-the-art food processing plant that will serve many thousands of people in that region, has the potential of igniting a whole agricultural industry in the whole region. We were fortunate enough to be able to be a part of a partnership that will impact far more than a handful of folks, will have impact on entire regions of a country. We said the physicians have their own code of conduct. They call it the Hippocratic Oath. Wouldn't it be good if those of us in the serving industry had something similar? And so we gave it a shot, and I'll leave that with you. First of all, number one, we'll never do for others what they have the capacity to do for themselves. When we do it, we disempower them. And so we won't assume responsibility. We'll encourage self-responsibility. Number two, we'll limit our one-way giving to crises, but seek always to find ways of legitimate exchange. Number three, we'll empower by hiring, by lending, and investing. That's what opportunity does better than anybody I know on the face of the globe. But we'll offer gifts sparingly, and particularly as incentives to reinforce achievements. Number 4, put the interests of the poor above our own interests or our organization's self-interest, even if it means changing our agenda. Number 5, we'll listen carefully to the spoken and the unspoken needs of those that we serve, knowing that many of those feelings and many of those needs are not expressed to those of us who serve. We'll listen carefully. And then number 6, this is the same thing as the last tenet of the Hippocratic Oath. Above all, to the best of my ability, I'll do no harm. Amen? Amen. Now it's your time. We've left about 10 minutes for responses from you that I will be glad to respond to, and we have a couple of our Nicaragua leaders here as well. So fire away and speak loud. There's a floating mic going around. There it is back there. And speak into that so that we can all hear. Comments, questions, reactions. I don't know. Whoever is selling those books asked me how much I get for them, and I said, I don't know. You bought them, so you set the price. So you got to deal with the book peddlers. There's the name of the latest book is Charity Detox, and I would be glad to sign any of those. I think they are for sale out here, but I can't cut you. I can't cut you a deal. You get it, don't you? You get it. We love the market. Comments, reactions, questions?
I've got a question. In the example you closed with Geraldine, I thought I heard that this is an outside idea that came in. Wouldn't it have been much better if we tried to finance an idea that they had?
The question is, wouldn't it be better if it were their idea? Well, one of the advantages of being an outside influence in a culture is that we bring connections to people who have been disconnected. And one of the reasons why people remain in poverty is because they are isolated. They're cut off from ideas, resources, capital that would enable them to thrive if they had those connections. And so I think that is one of the roles that an outside influence, an outside group, brings to people who are isolated. So now, in terms of ownership, one of the things that DK is working on these days is how you take a food processing operation and convert it to local ownership within the community. That's a major challenge and one that we're working on. And so this isn't outside folks coming in and doing for others. It's actually, I think that the highest form of charity is making money with the poor. Not making money on the poor, or not making money for the poor, but making money with the poor. I think that's the highest form of charity. And we have talents, abilities, capital, connections that can help accelerate that process by our involvement. So thank you. Thanks for that question. Where are we
Here.
at?
Right here. So I happened to have the privilege of being in Nicaragua 2 years ago with Geraldine and seeing a lot of that work done, and it's awesome. How do we locally start to help to be a change agent, to undo a lot of these programs that are out there? Feed My Starving Children, and within our churches, all of these, Christmas programs and things like that. It seems like a daunting task to undo all that work that we've done, ministers, communities.
Are you referring to the missions that our churches are engaged in locally?
Yeah.
Here in the States?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's a big challenge. Very often the church's involvement with the poor of their communities are like food pantries, clothes closets, giveaway programs, and frankly, much of that is unhealthy. A lot of that is toxic. It has unintended consequences. And so my recommendation to begin that process is buy a copy of Toxic Charity, actually buy a lot of copies of Toxic Charity, and begin a discussion within the church that could challenge the church to move on to the cutting edge. We love best practices. As a church, let's look at some of the best practices going on in our own country that can begin to be examples of how we change our systems. The frontal assault, I find, is not the most effective way. I don't think you want to tell people that they're toxic. But to create alongside our existing programs, for example, we set up a food pantry, which many churches do. We ask folk if they wanted to be a part of a food co-op, a kind of a buying club operation that would expand their food dollars pretty dramatically. Well, the reality is that the food co-op idea just put the food pantry out of business. We never closed the food pantry down. There are still, every once in a while, some folks will need it, but a better system has replaced it. And so we have hundreds of folks in our community that are involved in a co-op, and there's no loss of dignity or pride in the bargain that comes through co-op membership. The question you raise is a big one, and I think one that the Western Church is just beginning to grapple with. Those are encouraging signs to me. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Other comments? Yes, sir.
If we could just, and incidentally, thank you, Bob, for this extraordinary presentation. Can you cite one or two charities that today in this country are operating, like the model that you described we should operate with?
Well, there are some wonderful examples of the way we're doing our feeding. There's a group down in Florida who, instead of doing a food co-op idea, they're doing food store. They get donated foods, and they qualify their customers who purchase their groceries at a 30 cents on the dollar. So it's a huge bargain. And then they take that money to pay overhead, as well as provide services that enable their customers to make measured steps to move out of poverty. It's a part of job preparation. It's called Harvest Food and Community Outreach is the name of it. It's one of the most innovative programs I've seen. I think that they will be expanding beyond Florida as well. It's a great idea. I'll tell you another nonprofit that I think is doing a great job is Habitat for Humanity. An exchange process. Everybody works together. It's not a giveaway, it's a loan. That's a healthy organization. We have some good ones, but thanks for raising that, yes. We got a microphone. Here, somebody beat you to it, I'm sorry.
Thank you. My question is similar to my neighbor's, except we've already done that.
Done what?
Distributed your books. We had you at our church about a year and a half ago. Our community came.
Are you gonna out me?
But my question is, most people are on board, but we're still meeting with resistance from some of the old guard. And I'm wondering if you have suggestions on how we can gently deal with that resistance, without just waiting it out for them to disappear.
Well, I think that the old paradigm of giving away, a lot of times we have very committed Christian, compassionate people that have poured lots of their lives into some of those systems, and it's not going to go away easily. My advice is to create a new model alongside the existing model so that you don't have to face that we're shutting you down kind of drama, but a new model that is a better model. And I do think it's a slow process. It's an insight that's gaining traction around the country, but it's as slow as Louis Pasteur's discovery that it's not germs, or it's not bad blood that causes disease, it's germs. And that insight challenged a medical practice that had been good medicine for centuries. Bloodletting was what doctors did. That's how you get rid of, it's that bad blood you got to purge. It took 2 generations of physicians before that practice of bloodletting was antiquated and replaced with blood adding. It's a transfusion that's needed instead of purging. But physicians were not at all excited about Pasteur's new insight. But in fact, it changed medical practice that had been in vogue for thousands of years, literally. So I don't expect rapid change. What physician wants to admit that they've been doing malpractice? What caring person running a food pantry in a clothes closet wants to hear that your impact is toxic? So we can expect we can expect resistance, but creating new models alongside those existing, what I would consider antiquated models, is probably our best solution. And I think the sign up here is blinking that I'm 2 minutes past my time. Thank you.